Leslie Sanchez, let me ask you, I don't know that I am as altruistic in my belief of the media's coverage of race and the one as Clarence is. It seems to me that one of the factors of the Obama run was that the media found a heck of a lot more women and people of color to be pundits, to put out their boots on the ground, et cetera, because they knew, the hypocrisy of us talking about a black man running for the highest office and only having, a token woman or a token black on would be so screaming and so loud that we have to change this to a degree. Did you see that?
I would say, in all fairness, I saw it at CNN. There was an interesting piece that came out by the New York Times that had diversity among its pundits. And in that, it did a caption, a photograph of hour-by-hour coverage of who the pundits were on each of the cable, specifically cable. And if you looked at it, one looked very ethnically diverse, and then it got very white. In terms of just looking at the photograph, that particular photograph showed who the pundits were. What was so dynamic about this, it wasn't only race as much as a generational election, were younger voices, and even the distinct differences between younger communities of color and older communities of color. You can talk about the vast perspectives ideologically, but even in terms of where we grew up in our heritage, we brought something very different. So I think there was an aggressive push among many of the networks to look for more voices. I think then it became incumbent upon those individuals to have had experience, to have been kind of in the trenches for a while, to be given that opportunity. So that farm team had to be laid out probably a couple of years in advance, at least for the younger generation. And for the individuals who had experience, it was an opportunity to come again and have their voices heard. But Obama changed that, and it was a very critical step in terms of punditry.
And do you believe that was altruistic, or do you believe it was out of the need to, as I said before, to look a little less hypocritical when you're talking about race and the need for instance, the Republican Party to have more blacks and more women and be more inclusive, and then if you're sitting there and don't look that way? So,
well, it's very true. I mean, because in the past, if you were going to talk about just Republican, Democrat, you couldn't be a non-Hispanic, white, liberal talking about that the Republican Party needed diversity. It helped to have a little bit of a better context in terms of why it was important for the party to have that. So,
Joe, you're working on a book now that takes a look at the media and race, not only by virtue of coverage, but those who make decisions, what these newsrooms look like. There was, a few years back, very much ballyhooed by virtue of the numbers increasing, albeit very small in terms of people of color in decision-making positions, but we're starting to see those numbers fall back now. Talk to us about what you found.
Well, what I'm working on is looking at the creation of our media system and how people of color have fought for inclusion. And what is happening, the big issue is, Ed, I think, is that people of color, for the most part, we do not control the mass dissemination of our own image. Other people control our image, tell our stories, and when they tell our stories, they tell it wrong, and it causes great harm. And now, when it comes to diversity in the newsroom, we have made great gains since the 1968, 69, when the government had to create equal employment opportunity rules to tell the newsrooms, the first diversity initiative ever created by the government to increase diversity in newsrooms. You had a great increase in diversity for 30 years. Those rules got struck down by the court. We look at newsrooms with journalism. The fact is that we have a crisis in journalism. The issue of the lack of diversity in newsroom, you can't separate it out from the crisis in journalism. That the profit-driven, these media are profit-driven companies, industries, and journalism is not valued as part of the factor for the most part too often as determine the worth of a company or the worth of the newsroom. So what I mean by that is the fact is that here you have newsrooms where the managers are being judged not by the quality of journalism too often, but by how much money they bring in the next quarter. So where does diversity fit in there? It does not fit in there. So as we've seen last year with ASNI, more journalists left the newsroom for the first time in newspapers than entered it for the first time in 20 years. You would think in this presidential election, where we had the first African American candidate who became president, that we would actually learn a little more about the issues affecting people of color. But what happened in this presidential election, I think we did not really get into it. We did not delve into the issues of what's affecting people of color. I'm happy Leslie Sanchez is there. I don't know, where are the other Latinos, pundits on cable television? What happened to the Latino vote? No really discussion of that. So there's no great examination. What you have instead, you have shows where pundits get on, and instead of doing real news, everyone just debates and bickers without any real examination of news. And I'm saying that's because really journalism is not being valued in American newsrooms as it is in decline. That's what American journalism is in decline, and that's the argument we make in our book.